everyone, and welcome to another episode of Leadnap Gaming. Today we're going to talk about the ship pipeline and ship production, which is in part a mashup of the UI and ship panel talk from CitizenCon, the Star Citizen Live from earlier today, Friday the 6th of December, and also just looking at historical things CIG said and what we know. At the end, hopefully you'll have an idea of why that dream ship of yours you've waited years for since pledging seems unimportant to add to the verse. Well, new concepts for things no one asked for get put in right away. First, CIG primarily devotes resources in this regard to Squadron 42. If the ship's needed for that project, it's going to be produced. If Squadron 42 doesn't require that ship, it's going to stay in the waiting room. This, of course, accounts pretty heavily for why we have dozens of fighters, troop transport dropships, and a reclaimer that doesn't do anything. We know the reclaimer is featured heavily in Episode 1, but other salvage mechanics and ships like the Vulture don't exist yet because they're just not needed. Now, I will mention that today, the Vulture did show up again on the 3.9 roadmap. I wouldn't hold my breath on that because it shows just in-concept progress, but we might be seeing salvage in the middle of 2020. Next up, of course, is going to sound cynical, but CIG must regularly sell concepts. No one asked for a capital-sized mine layer, but it was announced and sold, and it sold well. Quantum interdiction is absolutely pointless currently, since the best places to actually tackle are programmed in as green zones, which prevent you from doing so. Honestly, I think just like Eve, the jump gates are going to be the hotspots for the Mantis, and in the foreseeable future, there is only going to be one of those in the Stanton system. The hype, however, brings in the dollars, and that's what really matters in this case. Are there better ways CIG could rake in this sort of cash? Of course! But that's a topic for another day. Our next stop is really the core of this, though I'm going to summarize a few findings from the panels I mentioned after, so do stay tuned for that because they do relate to all of this. After Squadron 42, the next big deciding factor in why we don't get certain ships is actually related to limitations of the verse. I'll use the whole series of ships to demonstrate this. The first obstacle to the whole series in the verse is a ship-specific mechanic. The transformation of the cargo grid for the articulation has issues. This has to be created from scratch since no other ship uses this functionality, and the physics grid system has to be entirely reprogrammed to prevent you from falling out of the ship as a result. Yes, it is just a part of development of the ship, but those development man-hours can be used elsewhere to potentially better gain. The same is true of the cargo box system. Frankly, they need to find a method that won't kill player system performance. The second mechanic in this is game mechanics that are not yet implemented. The Hull C and beyond will require ship-to-station docking to properly function. Loaded with cargo, these ships can't land. And while a workaround would certainly be to simply EVA to the station from the ship parked next to it, the station actually needs a system to technically know which ships are connected to it for the purposes of the trade terminal. In today's talk, we learned that the physics refractor has simplified all of this, which is really good news. Another principal example of this is actually the Nautilus, where drone and mine gameplay isn't yet completed. So even though the Nautilus has been said to be past grayboxing, meaning the ship model is actually almost relatively done, we still don't actually have it in game because that functionality isn't done. Now, you might point to the Reclaimer and say that's totally useless too, and you would be correct. CIG gets flack repeatedly about when is salvage coming, and they're going to get flack on the Carrack about exploration because currently the Carrack's relegated to package and cargo running. The more feature-required ships thrown into the verse just amplifies the vaporware claim and the frustration. Now, I'm not saying these are good reasons, but they are reasons. The next reason is really the most critical when it comes to what gets into the verse and when, and that's the actual verse. Continuing our whole series example, here's a graph compiled about the production and needs values for the Stanton system. I know, it's almost impossible to read at this scale, but let's zoom in on Port Olisar and look at scrap. Port Olisar has a maximum import demand of 2,333 SCU per tick. This means that in every server time revolution, Port Olisar has a demand of 2,333 SCU for everything. The bulk of Olisar's import demand is scrap metal, which in the entire Stanton system, scrap is produced at a rate of 2,255 SCU per tick. The Stanton system as a whole only produces 51,766.69 SCU per tick. Now, why are these numbers important, you ask? They're important because a hull D can move 20,000 SCU and a hull E 98,000, subject to change of course. This effectively means that a handful of players with hull Ds can halt and manipulate the economy of the entire system on their server. In other words, they're just too big for a single system universe. Ergo, CIG won't produce and release them until the verse is large enough for them. Let's use another example, the Idris. These ships are simply too large to introduce into the verse at present, and in this case related to server population. To fully crew an Idris, you need a crew of 28 people. Now, of course, that assumes manning all the stations, and then even a little extra. The issue is that you're taking a massive chunk of the server's current population to crew one single ship. Essentially meaning that when you spawn the Idris in with your party, you're all just going to be in your own server, with no one to shoot at. Hooray. Additionally, also taken into that is that on that server, there may not be the means statistically to destroy that Idris. And what I mean by that is if you take, say, 40 remaining players, giving the Idris a crew of 10, out of those 40 players, statistically, the number that even own retaliators may not be high enough that nothing could destroy the Idris in that server. Now, I know these are rough examples, but hopefully they kind of illustrate the point I'm getting at. Here's also the final reality we have to face. We know for sure that there are 5 to 6 development teams. However, multiple people have regularly slipped and essentially said each team is really just one person. We also know that it's safe to assume that 1 or 2 are on straight-to-flyable, unannounced ships or Squadron 42, leaving 3 to 4 artists building each ship. So that's some of the rationale and reason we have for why some ships get made right away and others languish in concept phase for an eternity. I want to now shift focus and process some of the panels from CitizenCon and from today's panel because I think it also sheds some light into this topic. First up is a major rework of our user interfaces on ships, and I'm not just talking about elevator buttons. Thankfully and woefully needed, each manufacturer is now going to have a unique set of interfaces for ship control. So, when you go from Drake to Origin, the shield management panel isn't going to be identical anymore. I also think this change is coming here in part because as the focus on multi-crew gameplay continues, the mini-game of these different control panels for larger ships are going to probably fill out, as they're going to require more complex interfaces and interactions to make each crew station actually worth manning for a person. The Prowler and Defender are excellent examples of this, where the Phalanx shield system requires a second person to actually manipulate it properly. In our current shield system, you can do the adjustments with your mouse pad, and it's really basic. Second from the ship panel, I had 2 takeaways I really wanted to talk about here, which will lead us towards that merchantman information. The first relates to expense, which ties back to an earlier point in this video. CIG used the Carrack as an example, but certain elements from the art concepts have been deleted from a lot of ships related to system expense. The original armored canopy for the Carrack would have been a massive system killer on a lot of lesser machines as a result of the way it would have been built in the 3D model. The canopy they showed us instead is a model that uses large armored panels that retract. Well, in the concept, they were smaller slats, which would also take up less space to store in real life. This is a notable difference, and it does dramatically change the look. But in the end, CIG is choosing to leave you with a method that ensures the game's playable over the original concept design in the JPEG. After that was the rationale for bringing the Carrack back under 130 meters, which, if you didn't actually know, it's smaller than the original concept at this point. Now, this is mentionable for the following reason. Had the Carrack been 150 meters long, had it kept the 1000 SC where it was originally quoted, it would be potentially an $800 ship. That would have been the best route potentially for CIG to cash in big, but CIG said the size was reduced because otherwise the spawn restrictions of the 890 and Reclaimer would also apply to the Carrack. It wouldn't fit on all of SAR's pads. Now, I personally don't see an issue with this, as it's somewhat arbitrary once we get bed logging to work better. Also, the Carrack isn't designed as a shuttle. It's designed to be lived on for long durations, so limited launching points isn't a big deal to me. The note here is that CIG is taking some gameplay function over bank account bonus. However, this ties into that merchantman discussion from this morning, which I think was a major insight into this element, and which is why we're talking about it today. Yes, the merchantman, if you didn't know, is going to see a cargo reduction, in the name of not wanting to make the ship even larger. The first note here is that CIG argues the metrics have changed, suggesting that every large ship concept is going to see a reduction in size. I also think this is a cop-out, though, to the fact that they just introduced a new variant of a $1,300 ship, And if the purpose-made concept that was sold for a fraction of that were better, the big spender F5 war victors would be very angry. I'll give them that the Merchantman is supposed to be able to fit on planetary pads in remote isolated areas per lore, so not making it supermassive is understandable, but my core observation from today's ship talk is no one is going to be a titan of industry, rather just a captain. Thus, the prevailing rule of thumb for CIG concept sales remain: never get too excited about a ship coming out, because there's a huge chance it is massively nerfed and feature deleted on release. This isn't the end of the world. I giggled thinking about my 1000 SCU Carrack, but truthfully, I'm quite satisfied with the sub 500 SCU release listing. The painful yet positive message has been, look, we learned a lot in this process towards balance of gameplay and are reflecting on that going forward. I do think that's a benefit to us the players, so long as these modifications are related to game balance and not CIG's bank balance. What do you think? Let's talk in the comments below. As always, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time.